A baby gorilla refused to let a man leave. The reason brought him to tears. The emerald canopy of the Virunga Mountains hung heavy with the humid promise of rain, a thick, suffocating blanket of moisture that seemed to trap every sound within the ancient ferns. Deep within this verdant labyrinth, a silence had fallen, not the peaceful quiet of a sleeping forest, but a jagged, anxious stillness that vibrated through the damp earth. Damien, a man whose skin had been weathered by decades of African sun into a map of fine lines and deep bronze, stood frozen in a small clearing. His boots were caked in the dark volcanic mud that smelled of rotting vegetation and ancient minerals, but he didn't feel the weight of the climb. All he felt was the small, trembling pressure of a hand against his thigh. Pogo, a 3-year-old mountain gorilla whose fur was the color of charcoal and midnight, was not just holding on, he was anchoring himself. The infant's fingers, surprisingly strong and textured like fine, supple leather, were threaded through the fabric of Damien's cargo pants with a desperate, white-knuckled intensity. Every time Damien attempted to shift his weight, to take even a single step toward the path that led back to the sanctuary, a low, guttural whimpering rose from the forest floor. A sound so thin and fragile it seemed it might shatter against the towering mahogany trees. It was a behavior that defied every law of the wild. Young gorillas, even those raised in rehabilitation, are driven by a biological imperative to move with the troop, to forage, and to explore the safety of the heights. Yet Pogo was refusing to let go, his amber eyes wide and clouded with a depth of sorrow that no textbook could explain. He wasn't just staying, he was pleading. This was a mystery written in the language of the heart, a silent scream for help that would eventually bring a grown man to his knees in tears. Before we uncover the heartbreaking secret that Pogo was carrying in his small, shaking chest, I want to take a moment to welcome you to our community. If stories of the profound bond between humans and the natural world touch your soul, please consider hitting that like button and subscribing to the channel. It helps us continue to tell these vital stories. And while you're here, leave a comment below letting us know where in the world you are watching from and what time it is there. We love seeing how far our global family of animal lovers reaches. The sanctuary at the edge of the rainforest was more than a facility, it was a cathedral of second chances. The air there always smelled of crushed eucalyptus and the sharp, metallic tang of the morning mist. Damien had arrived there years ago, seeking a purpose that the concrete jungles of Europe could never provide. He found it in the eyes of the orphans, the survivors of poaching and habitat loss. Pogo had been his greatest challenge and his greatest joy. When Pogo first arrived, he was a ball of matted fur and terror, smelling of the smoke and grease from the crates he had been trapped in. Damien had spent months sleeping on a thin mat near the gorilla's enclosure, mirroring his movements, grunting softly in the low-frequency vibrations that gorillas use to signal peace. He became Pogo's surrogate troop, his protector, and his bridge back to the living. They spent their days in the dappled sunlight of the enclosure, Damien teaching the youngster how to strip the bitter bark from the bamboo shoots and how to find the succulent wild celery that grew near the stream. The bond was forged in the shared warmth of the afternoon sun and the rhythmic, synchronized chewing of greens. There was a profound trust there, a sense that they spoke a language beyond words, a language of touch, scent, and shared breath. But as the seasons turned and the heavy rains began to wash the dust from the world, that trust was put to the ultimate test. The crisis did not arrive with a roar, it arrived with a slow, agonizing fade. It began when Pogo stopped eating his favorite treats, the sweet, sticky highland berries that Damien would bring as a reward for their long walks. The young gorilla began to sit in the corners of his enclosure, his head bowed, his breathing shallow and punctuated by a faint clicking sound that set Damien's nerves on edge. The sanctuary's head veterinarian, Dr. Aris, was called in. The air in the medical bay was cold and sterile, smelling of rubbing alcohol and the ozone of the diagnostic machines. They ran blood tests, checked for parasites, and listened to the rhythmic thrumming of Pogo's heart through cold stethoscopes. Clinically, everything seemed within the margins of normalcy. There was no fever, no obvious infection, no broken bones. Yet Pogo was wasting away. His charcoal fur lost its luster, becoming dry and brittle like dead grass, and the light in his eyes seemed to retreat into some dark, internal cavern. The keepers were desperate. They tried every trick in the book, offering warm milk infused with vitamins and nesting him in the softest blankets. But Pogo remained unresponsive to everything except Damien. Whenever Damien tried to leave the room to consult with the doctors, the gorilla would let out a piercing, high-pitched shriek that echoed off the tiled walls, a sound of pure, unadulterated abandonment. It was as if Pogo believed that the moment Damien stepped out of sight, the world would cease to exist. The clinical signs continued to worsen, his weight plummeted, and his lethargy grew until he could barely lift his head. The experts were baffled, speaking in hushed tones about failure to thrive and psychological trauma, but Damien knew it was something more. He could feel it in the way the gorilla clung to him, not with the strength of a healthy animal, but with the frantic grip of someone drowning. The reveal happened on a Tuesday, a day when the sky was a bruised purple and the air was thick with the scent of an impending storm. Damien had decided to take Pogo back out to the forest clearing, hoping that the familiar smells of the earth and the sound of the wind in the leaves might spark some primal instinct to survive. It was there, in that circle of ancient trees, that the refusal happened. Pogo had clamped his hand onto Damien's leg and wouldn't let go. Damien sat down in the mud, ignoring the cold seepage against his skin, and pulled the small gorilla into his lap. He began to massage the infant's chest, a technique he used to calm the orphans during thunderstorms. As his fingers pressed into the soft space between Pogo's ribs, he felt it, a sharp, jagged protrusion that didn't belong. It wasn't a bone, and it wasn't a tumor. It was something hard, something alien. Damien's heart hammered against his ribs like a trapped bird. He signaled for the medical team to bring the portable X-ray unit to the clearing. He refused to move the gorilla and break the fragile connection they had found. Under the flickering light of the portable monitor, the truth emerged with terrifying clarity. Pogo hadn't just been mourning. He was a living tomb for a piece of the past. Lodged deep within the soft tissue near his diaphragm, inches away from his heart, was a jagged shard of a metal snare, a remnant of the day he was captured, a day his mother had been taken from him. The wound had healed on the outside, leaving a scar hidden by fur, but the metal had migrated internally, pressing against his lungs and heart every time he moved. The behavioral refusal wasn't stubbornness, it was a plea for a physical release from a pain he couldn't name. Pogo knew that only Damien had the power to see him, to truly feel the acidic scent of pain that had been radiating from his body for weeks. The surgery was a high-stakes gamble performed under the canopy of the forest, as the risk of transporting him back to the lab was too great for his weakened heart. The air was filled with the metallic scent of blood and the sterile hiss of the oxygen tank. Damien stayed by Pogo's head, whispering into his ear, his voice a steady anchor in the sea of medical chaos. When the surgeon finally extracted the rusted 3-inch piece of wire, a collective breath was released by everyone in the clearing. The resolution began almost immediately. As the anesthesia wore off and the sun began to dip below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of burnt orange and soft gold, Pogo opened his eyes. For the first time in months, the fog had cleared. He looked at Damien, and for a long, silent minute, they simply breathed together. It was a synchronized breathing, a slow, rhythmic ebb and flow that signaled the body was no longer at war with itself. The tension that had lived in Pogo's shoulders for so long simply evaporated, replaced by a soft, liminal peace. Damien felt the gorilla's hand slowly relax its grip on his arm, but instead of pulling away, Pogo reached up and gently touched Damien's cheek, his fingers tracing the path of the tears that were now flowing freely down the man's face. It was the first moment of true physical reconnection, a touch that wasn't born of fear, but of profound, soul-deep gratitude. This story leaves us with a hauntingly beautiful philosophical legacy. It teaches us that animal intelligence is not just about problem-solving or tool use. It is about an emotional complexity that often mirrors, or even surpasses, our own. Pogo's sixth sense allowed him to understand that his survival was entirely dependent on the man who had become his father. He didn't have the words to describe the shard of metal cutting into his spirit, but he had the intuition to use the only thing he had, his presence, to force a realization. It reminds us that empathy is a bridge that spans the gap between species. When we look into the eyes of a creature like Pogo, we aren't just looking at a subject or a specimen, we are looking at a consciousness that feels, remembers, and loves with a purity that is often lost in the noise of the human world. The bond between Damien and Pogo is a testament to the idea that love is a biological necessity, as vital to life as oxygen or water. It is the invisible thread that pulls us back from the brink of despair. As we look back on that afternoon in the Virunga Mountains, we see more than just a successful medical intervention. We see the triumph of the spirit. Pogo eventually returned to the heights, his fur growing thick and lustrous once more, his movements full of the exuberant grace of a young silverback in the making. But he never forgot the man who stayed in the mud with him. Whenever Damien visits the edge of the troop's territory, a certain young gorilla will pause, look back, and beat his chest in a rhythm that sounds suspiciously like a heartbeat. It is a final, emotional summary of a journey that began in tragedy and ended in a miracle. We hope this story has reminded you of the incredible depth of the animal kingdom. If it moved you, please hit that like button, subscribe to our channel for more long-form documentaries, and share this video with someone who needs a reminder of the power of love. Before you go, we have a question for you. Have you ever experienced a moment where an animal seemed to have a sixth sense about your feelings or a hidden problem? We'd love to hear your stories in the comments below. Thank you for watching and for being part of this journey into the heart of the wild.